Dr. Moroka of MOESD talked about computer literacy and the need to have teachers adopt appropriate methodologies in teaching students in the areas of science and tech. Also talked about demystifying science, which is very important in Africa, because a lot of African kids think that science is something in the West, not something that belongs there. Who should influence in research? So these are all key issues. I would now like you for the next 25 or so minutes to interact with the panel in asking questions or making remarks as you may. Thank you very much. So at the end, there will be a 5-minute discussion led by my colleague, Dr. Peki Ovibuate of UNESCO. But let's start. Who would like to start off? Let me remind you, there will be gender balance. Okay, let's start with you.
And thank you for the ministers for their thoughts. I was at a small workshop last week on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics training in Australia, and it was pointed out there that if you ask, has been done, if you survey students and ask them if they're interested in doing technology, they're all very interested in that. If you survey them and ask them if they're interested in doing science, they're not so interested in that. And Australia, like many countries, is seeing a decline in students doing science. Even though, as was pointed out, that the science is what underlies the technology. Has anything like that, to your knowledge, been done in African countries, and then the attitudes of students learn?
Let me pass this. Do you know of any of these kinds of attitude surveys? Panelists? Attitude surveys?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, we did have a survey in Mauritius a few years ago. And what we found out is that the decision for the child to opt for science or not to opt for science is very often not the child's decision, it is the parent's decision. And the two questions that the parents would ask in deciding whether the children will actually do science or not is, what's the teacher like? Is it a good science teacher or not? And then the more important question is, what kind of a job is my child going to get with science? And the likelihood is that, at least in those days in Mauritius, if you do science at school or at university, the likelihood is that you become a science teacher, full stop. So I think the perception of the choice is not very often the child, at least in the case of Mauritius. It is the career aspiration that dominates whether one's going to do science or not. And when we look at the salaries that scientists are getting compared to other professions, then we can agree or we can see why parents would say, well, don't bother with science, go and do economics or accountancy or be a lawyer, for example.
Maybe I can just add that in addition to what the doctor has just said, here there's also a question of saying, do you want to pass? If you want to pass, don't do science. So that attitude, there's a lot of it. If you want to pass, don't do it. And that obviously influences the children on how they, what they should take. And let me also add that in Botswana, we are currently working on programs where we can try, as I said, to demystify science. We are trying to make arrangements with BUST, for instance, to work with one of the universities in Australia to work on a program where you can actually go out there and engage the children. Go out there and engage the children, show them that science can be is practical. They literally live around science, or they live with science. And just from that point, we believe the children will be able to realize that this is something that we can actually do.
Let's see there, back there, and then after that,
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Idris Anyango from Kenya. I want to say something about science and technology in Kenya. That is not our problem. Our problem is now how to get students get to arts. Because arts has just collapsed. And that, to me, as an educator, worries me very much. So even as we are promoting science, we must do it in balance so that we keep the other side also. Thank you, but that is not what I intended to say. We have engineers here. I am a farmer. I encourage farming. There is a problem with food security in this continent. The way Africans farm cannot sustain food security. For how long will people use horse to feed the continent? For how long will people not, have nowhere to take their produce? For how long will farmers be there without anybody to tell them what is new out there? I'm urging our engineers here to come up with implements that can be used to sustain food production. Simple things that can be used, and I think it can be done. That is my plea to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Panelists, these are important sets of questions. And yes, I think there are two questions that are intertwined here. The first one came with the remark that is, can science on its own solve society's problems? You don't have some sort of integration of that with social sciences. So that's one. I think that's the interpretation of that. The second thing is that will farming and those kinds of methods of production that are still primitive provide enough food for a population that is increasing? Can scientists, technologists come up with implements that are simple and affordable? So please answer one or both of these questions.
I'd rather go for the last set of ideas, and that is, I recall there was one international conference to which a very renowned scientists were invited. One of them was an Ethiopian who has got huge security, Dr. Professor Gabisa. After he made his presentations, and finally he showed us a small slide, few slides. One slide was about his childhood, and showing the countryside with oxygen and so on. After he became a professional scientist, internationally renowned scientist, he said he saw the current situation, and I recall what you said, that what reminds me. And finally he concluded, science made no contribution to the African agriculture and Ethiopian. That's the reality. Now, should technology solve this problem? Yes. Science should solve this problem? Yes. We have something in the pipeline, basically. We have one national corporation, Metal Engineering Corporation. They are developing small tractors, and these small tractors is going to be distributed to the countryside, affordable, that we think, very affordable for the farmer. But the problem is the fuel. With fossil fuel, that's not going to be economical. So in Ethiopia, the government has assigned about 25 million hectares for jatropha plantation. Another small technology has been developed. Well, the technology existed. Biofuel can be produced. You engage the farmers to produce the jatropha plant, and then they can develop. It can be at the household, at the level of the household. You can have the biofuel, or you can have some central biofuel development development plant. It's easy. So with this, that technology is going to be available. It could be affordable, because biofuel And the small tractors that can be at the possession of the farmers. We have created, in other words, so one other system basically, machine release. It is one program in Ethiopian development. But through machine release, a farmer can own that small tractor. But to run it, it's going to be his cost. With biofuel, he can't afford this. With fossil fuel, he can't afford it. So we're thinking of developing a biofuel for him to run that machine.
Thank you. Another good response. That's good. But we have time for just 2 questions that should be pooled. In other words, those questions pooled, and the panel will respond because we have just 5 minutes left. Please, let's see. We saw a hand there. So 2 questions pooled.
Okay, thank you. I'm Veridiana.
And then you behind.
Okay, I'm Veridiana Masanja from the University of Rwanda. My question, I've been asking it each time we meet, and also at many other forums. And now I hear the ministers are also complaining about the same thing, that governments are not putting, our governments are not putting money into science and technology. Now, since the 60s, our governments, most of our governments were signatory to the 0.1% GDP. And then it was renewed and renewed, but recently, through NEPA, African Union countries agreed to have 1% of GDP by 2009. Sometime in 2010, there was a report which showed that about 4 countries have reached there, but it was corrected. Actually, even South Africa is 0.9 something. Now, if the ministers are themselves saying that governments are not putting money, who should we complain to now? Because I thought that now ministers should pin down their governments and make sure that this happens. So please, can you tell us how we go about it now? We hear from the ministers, they are also complaining.
Then the next question, we'll give them the opportunity to answer that. There are either ministers or representatives of ministers.
Thank you. I'm Professor Hans Kuken from Cape Town, South Africa. I've been Dean of Research for all faculties for the last 10 years. And when I retired, I actually took over the Energy Institute, which I established 10 years earlier. My question, which may be loaded, is however, do we really make, as university administrators, do we really make science attractive for Africa? We've just heard, and I'm also an engineer, though I started off with nuclear science. But in Africa, I think engineering is the most important part of science. And the mere fact that we don't get enough children following science shows that perhaps, and this is a question, could we not make science more attractive for youngsters? What I mean by that, could we not make it problem-solving research? In other words, to solve problems that we have in Africa. I will later on give a talk about the Humboldt Foundation work and the Agnes network that we've got in session 3. And we're trying to roll out one of the major European sponsors for research to try and get us back into Africa perspective. We have different problems. The environment has been pumped into us from all sides, but is this really the priority for Africa? Is it global warming, which I question, or is it really a question of climate change? And here, yes, we can share a lot of fundamental research, but does it really solve our problems? I think the politicians would be able to help us there.
Two questions put together. The first is, who is responsible for ensuring that the African countries raise investment in science and technology to at least the minimal 1%? The second question is, how can we make science more attractive to students in Africa?
Well, I think these are two very difficult questions. But I'll share with you one experience which I had talking to a minister of responsible for science and technology. I'm not going to mention the African country. But the chap said to me one day, he said, one of the difficulty of science ministry, or a minister responsible for science and technology, is that he has to poke his nose into the affairs of other ministries. Because science and technology cuts across all ministries. It is not, and I don't think it can be just segregated, isolated into one department. The water, the ministry responsible for water, for energy and food, all these have science. So the difficulty for the science minister is, how does he deal with the affairs of other ministries while being confined into his own little space? And I think there's a lot of tension with the ministries with regard to, how you can achieve that target of 1% GDP. It's a question of how do you do the accounting as well. What is science, what is technology, where does science stop, where the technology starts? And I think it's very debated, but I totally agree there is a paucity, there's a lack of funding in science and technology. How do you make science more attractive? I don't know. I mean, we've been asked that question many, many years ago, but I think it starts, by making it attractive to young people. To me, Newton's second law is the same wherever you go, whether you're in Africa or in London or whatever. But the way it's taught can be contextualized. And this is where we fail miserably. We tend to follow the models of other so-called developed countries in our teaching habits. This may not be applicable to Africa. I don't agree that we have scientific or technological projects, because there's only one kind of project. All projects, if they want to be successful, if they want to be applied, if they want to be owned by the people, should be a social project. A scientific project to me does not exist. If it exists, it will exist as a report and not as a project. A scientific project is accepted by the people, it becomes a social project. So I totally agree with one of the speakers earlier on. We scientists, sometimes we fail in communicating the scientific ideas so that the science project becomes a social project. Thank you.
I think the element of actually countries or governments spending money in science and technology, certainly, as he said, it's a bit more complicated at times. But I think even where, like in Botswana, where we end up having a policy on science and technology, I think the major thing is in the implementation. How do you go about the implementation of that same policy that you have? And this is the challenge that we have. And we are saying, even though it's multi-sectoral, it is for us, those who are involved in science and technology, to also stand up and advocate for the use of the funds in science and technology. I think this can be done. In some countries like Botswana, the platform is there. You can see things are changing around, things are changing. But it's for those who are involved to also voice out and say, yes, you can deliberate on this. How do you stand up and take control of this situation? So it's for both government, academia, industry to work together to push this. If academia tries to push it on their own, they will not make it. If the minister tries to push it, without the backup of industry and academia, again, I don't think it will be successful. I think if these three legs can work together, then we will go somewhere. I think that is very, very critical. And the interest of science, the youth in science and technology, yes, I agree with you entirely. It is the way we package the whole thing. We should make it interesting to them and make them realize that this is something that can be done. It is the packaging, it comes with the packaging. And the way we teach it, the way, whatever we say about it, we promote even certain stereotypes. And that way we are not going to increase the number of students who take up science if we are going to be promoting those stereotypes.
Thank you. I know that this is one of the preoccupations of UNESCO, and I saw Dr. Brito stands there. So please go ahead, let them give you the mic so you say something about UNESCO's perspective on this.
Yes, something that we are looking at is that one of the problems of the measurements, and principally from a perspective of the government itself and the ministries of science, is that we measure our investment as the funds that are managed and implemented by the Ministry of Science and Technology or related agencies. We don't look normally how much money, for instance, health ministries spend on research and on capacity building in scientific areas. The same goes to education ministries. The same goes to industrial ministries that do a lot of capacity building on new technologies, that do research on technology transfer and so on. So it's also the way we look to the budget that goes to the policies. And the reason why we do that is because we think the science policy belongs to the Ministry of Science and Technology. And that's where the problem starts. So that's where I said, for UNESCO, it's a transversal, cross-cutting, structural policy, because it does give the basis for other sectorial policies to be better implemented, but also makes it to belong to the other in-line ministries and to the other parts of government. And until we change this mindset and trying to hold and say, this is the only policy I can control, we are done. It's the kind of policy that needs to be shared by as many as possible, including finance ministers, planning ministers. They have to own the science, technology, and innovation policies of the country, because otherwise we will never get above higher percentages of GDP.
Just very short.
To the question, the government is not putting enough funds to research. Yes, I'm a minister, member of the cabinet. If we mean the Council of Ministers, we have a number of 9 ministers in that. Territoriality is a problem. This is my territory. That is how people think. Territoriality is really a problem in Ethiopia and in the rest of Africa, the same democratic condition, everywhere. So now what we are devising is, under the council, the National Council of STI, there will be a special body, which is known as Research Council. All research programs will pass through that. Minister of Science and Technology is the Secretary of the National Council of STI. So we have institutional capacity that does not exist anywhere in Africa, including Ethiopia. But there will always a national capacity. And we have now accepted the national capacity on 9 programs. Biodiversity, pharmaceutical, whatever. So these programs for research is going to pass on these national capacities are going to be approved by the National Council, and then will be fall in the role. That is the way. As how to popularize science, we have to prove. First, in Africa in general, being a government employee was a big privilege. Nowadays, that's well paid. That now new to this country. If we prove to the society and to the family that engineering scientists is going to get a better pay, so the attitude is going to shift as far as I think. So we have to disseminate that kind of information. We have to propagate for it and popularize it as much as we can.
Thank you. I think we've come very close to closure. Let's also let Dr. Oti Boateng to make some remarks, and then we've got some questions that we can address.
Thank you very much. I think we're trying to catch up on time, so I won't drag it. But I need 2 concrete things from the ministers or minister representative. Could you give us one commitment from the ministry to enhancing science, technology, and innovation? Just one, very short, less than 1 minute. And also one concrete recommendation you would want to make to this assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start,
I think it's tall order. I think that one thing that can make a difference actually is precisely what my colleague on my right hand side has said. Ministries is about turf protecting, and science is everything but turf protecting because it goes throughout, in all ministries. So one thing that I would say, recommend, is that whoever is going to be responsible for science and technology must have the authority. And to me, these are just, it boils down to two places in government. Either science should become part of the President's office or the Prime Minister's office. Then it will have the authority to make things happen in all ministries.
He skipped out of it. Let it be on record that he didn't make a commitment. But he already made some commitments. Let me restate the question. What commitment can you make about the government of Ethiopia's interest in making a change or improving any of the systems we've been talking about? Is there one commitment that you can make on behalf of your government?
The National Council of Science, Technology and Innovation is chaired by Deputy Prime Minister. That is why every line minister is going to listen. That is the only solution. That structure is going to make things working. And we are on that trend, and we are going to push it, stick to it.
So the commitment is that will continue.
I think from Botswana's perspective, as I said earlier, the formation of the Human Resource Development Council comes at the right time, because it's also going to involve funding for research. We know there's a policy for research which is housed in the Ministry of Infrastructure, Science and Technology. We are willing as a ministry to support the institutions, the local institutions in terms of research through this council. And this is something that we are going to be working on to ensure that research begins to bear fruits. We can see the research as government. So this is our support for the institutions, for the Human Resource Development Council is going to be very critical here. We are also determined to ensure that, as I said, we start from the lower levels to demystify mathematics and science to try and increase the number of students who take up science and technology.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've heard many recommendations, remarks, analysis of the situation with science and technology in Africa. The key themes that we heard have to do with collaboration, innovation, funding, popularization of science, communication, finding stakeholders to be part of it, remembering that science alone may not be enough unless put within the context of social circumstances, looking at how to pull together resources. So I thank you very much. I'm sure that these issues will continue to dominate our deliberations in subsequent conferences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like you to join me again in thanking the ministers and the ministers' representative. Thank you. My clock says a few minutes to 4, so may I suggest that we have coffee, because 4 is coffee time. We have to go by the hotel times. Have coffee and for 15 minutes, and then we break into our various groups. The various group, well, I asked Professor Udisi to give us the arrangements for the rooms. We have one of the groups here. There are people standing out there with the various names for the various groups. So you'll be informed accordingly during tea time. So we will break straight into those groups. And since we don't have much time, we will do this, we'll be in the group discussion for the next 2 hours. Are you tired? So that we can finish both sessions, you know, as indicated. Is that okay? Diminishing returns, no, it's too early to have diminishing returns. So can I suggest that after tea we go into our various groups? And remember, it's parallel sessions. You are quiet. Is it okay? Yeah? So please, or it's too early to have coffee. So silence means approval? Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes, that's why I'm saying that we have 2 separate sessions. Yeah. But the original is that we have the first session and then we have coffee. But we can't have that luxury now because it's 4 o'clock and then the hotel will have to give her the coffee. So let's have the coffee, then we go into our various groups, have the first session for 1 hour, then we have the second session for the next hour. But in the same parallel, because they're the same thematic groups, isn't it? Yes, so that's to make it easier for us. So have coffee now, and we extend till 6 o'clock. But please, we need your inputs in these various groups. Thank you.
Yeah?